Hello, this is Fox. I am not a game designer, and I want to make a game. This game is the only game I've ever wanted to make. What am I doing? I have had multiple versions of this game, and I feel like I never refined the idea enough, both for myself to be able to understand what I actually wanted, and to be able to bring it to other people and have them understand what I want. Um, and there are lots and lots of things that I made decisions on, that I thought about, that I was like, oh man. But all of those things were outside of the circle, right? Right. We're talking about like it was a fantasy setting. It had lore, right? It had like all of this stuff, right? That stuff, none of that stuff mattered. What I want to get at right now in this video is what is actually in here to me, right? I did a lot of thinking, and this game is not really any different from any of the other games I've made. I mean, it kind of feels like I've made two different games so far and then just didn't finish them, but what actually happened was I had one game I wanted to make, and then I felt like I didn't end up making that game by the end of those versions. There are two versions. There's version 1 and version 2. The first thing is I wanted to make a card game. Realistically, I want to make a trading card game. With trading card games, because of a lot of things, comes things like collectability, comes things like randomness, come thing, etc. But the base part of the game is I wanted to make a card game on a board, right? It didn't really matter a whole lot else. The original idea was just these two things, right? That you have cards, and they have a little dude, and that you put it on a board, and they moved around, right? And you had all these strategies, and then they would fight, right? And then you go and you'd kill your opponent. That has always been the core of the idea, and that is what we want, right? And from there, it has developed further. The next thing was something that took a long time for me to come to. I did a lot of thinking, and I realized one of my big issues with both versions 1 and 2 was the third one. I wanted to be both a strategy game and a tactics game. I shouldn't have erased this thing, but if you picture that board I had, right? You have all these little, well, here, let's just draw a square. You have all these little things going on all over the map, right? The strategy part of it is you have all these little things, and you have to decide, right? Like where to attack. You have to decide where to place things. You have to decide all these little, like where do you put your energy and resources. But the tactics part of it is once you get in that little section, what little maneuvers can you make to get around your opponent and then kill them, right? Or what can you do to gain little advantages, right? Like actually on the front lines, right? Like, are there little things that you can do? The first version was essentially just a tactics game, right? You had units, and you put them on the board, and then you smacked them around together. The big issue with that game, we're kind of a little off track here, but the big issue with that game is that the unit that you need to kill to win the game was like too mobile and would just run around the board constantly, and like both players would just avoid each other. And I probably could have refined this game and made it like an interesting little tactics game, but my goal wasn't to make a tactics game. This is version 1. Version 2 then was like, well, so let's add some strategy to it. Let's add things like farms, right? Right? So now every time you put a unit, you slap the unit on the board, right? The only way to get it to move is that you had to attach it to a farm. Um And that was actually really cool. The issue with it is I was never really able to get enough cards in people's hands in order to be able to run around and have tactics involved. But one thing I figured out from this version was that if you put something that you had to defend, like a set point, it gives the whole game structure and meaning. So what I did is I put a city on both sides and a big mountain in the middle, and you had to go around it on either side, and you attacked your opponent. But these battles were really boring. The overall strategy was really interesting. You had to figure out which side to push on. You had to figure out where to put your defensive structures, or really all structures were defensive. So you just had to put your right, and you got to litter the battlefield with all these tiny little farms everywhere, and it created this really nice little countryside feel to it. Like, oh, you're in the country, but you're also fighting people, and that was cool. But understand that neither of these games accomplished strategy and tactics. And that really bugged me. The next part was something has been there the whole time, but I really put words to it recently. And that is that I want to be able to have armies and teams be able to fight like at a reasonably equal playing field. It doesn't have to be perfectly balanced, as long as we are able to represent both sides of the coin. Part of the issue with constantly having farms attached to your units is that it forced both sides to have essentially, farms ended up feeling more like a pop cap than like a Magic the Gathering land or an action point system. It really felt like a limiting factor, and that both players were going to end up with the exact same amount of units the whole time. One interesting thing about that is that if I wanted to just eliminate some of this stuff, we could add in tactics, but eliminate armies and just run it kind of like a MOBA, where you had, I don't know how many units you'd get on the field by the end of the game, maybe 6 or 7, but you had this little team of 6 or 7 units running around, and maybe one of them would die, right? And then you bring in another one, but you had the farms limiting the amount of units you had, and so you could still attack your farms to make your opponents not be able to do anything, but we could have developed these units more, right? But that isn't really the route I was looking to take, mostly because I was always bugged by this part. A lot of the stuff in version 1 was kind of able to accomplish that in its own ways. The big issue with versions of this was that because there was no action point limiter, just having tons of units was just better, because the more things you had, the more things you could do to your opponent, right? So being able to reconcile both these things is difficult, and it might not really be possible, but I think that there are ways to do it, right? One of the big things is just being allowed to either have counterplay with things like area of effect damage, or things like just having more action points, being able to do more on the team side. But we'll get to that in an upcoming video where I talk about solutions. The thing that we really got to talk about, though, and this is the core of everything, right? This is the core of everything. What I really want, I want to have these 4 things, and I think that this game is possible, and I think that there are difficulties with many of these things, but one more thing is I want to make cool stuff. Right? This is a real problem with the second version. So the first version had a lot of cool stuff. It was kind of fun to work with. It just, the fact that the game itself didn't work was always very frustrating. The second version literally worked. I tell this to everybody I talk to about this game. The second version worked. but it was so bland and it was so boring and it took way too long to play. And I think there could be a market for somebody finding this game fascinating and really wanting to get into it. But not only I felt that we found the skill ceiling really really easily, but also it just wasn't any fun to work on, right? Like I didn't get to the chance. Like I wasn't like the things I want to do is I want to make unique characters. I want to make like monsters, and I want to have flashy plays. Like like I don't know exactly how important all of this is, as long as it is understood that the fifth thing is that there's just got to be something here. My favorite, like I used to play Yu-Gi-Oh for forever. Yu-Gi-Oh is the game of powerful stuff. If you're constantly getting bothered by powerful stuff, you should play a different trading card game, because that is the design. That is what the designers have told you they're going to do, is make powerful stuff all the time. And I enjoy watching powerful Magic the Gathering formats. I don't really know why. I feel like none of my friends understand it. I'm not even sure I understand it, but at the end of the day, I do think it's kind of fun when the card pools are really big and the plays are really flashy and you're really kind of push the limit for certain things. I don't know. but but yeah, so this is the first video I'm going to make. This is the game I want to make. Okay? And I feel that this is not only achievable, I feel like if this stuff is satisfied, I can be satisfied. I think if other things aren't satisfied, like I can work around all that. But as long as we can get to the point where I can do this, I think I'm happy. The second video I'm gonna make, I'm gonna stop this video. I'm gonna make a separate YouTube video. Is I want to talk about one of my first proposals for meeting all this stuff. I think now that I have this, in theory, I could start from scratch and make a new game that attempts to do all this. But my first thought is that I can accomplish all of these things now that I know that I want these things and import them into version 2. And so I have a proposal for what my next system is going to look like. And I was curious to get some people's thoughts on it. Obviously, at some level, this requires some knowledge of version 2. This video is mostly aimed at a friend of mine that video will be aimed mostly at a friend of mine that played it. But we'll see how it goes. Thanks for watching, and see you later.